This audio talks about stress. Stress arises less from actual events and more from our interpretation of events. This is called the appraisal theory of stress. The primary appraisal is assessing stress in the present situation and constitutes three categories: the irrelevant, the benign, and the stressful. If primary appraisal is negative, then you move forward with secondary appraisal. The secondary appraisal involves the material preparedness to deal with the stress. There are four major categories of stressors. The first being significant life changes like the death of a loved one, loss of a job, having children, leaving home, etc. The second are catastrophic events like a cyclone. The third are daily hassles like long store lines, forgetting car keys, etc. The fourth are ambient stressors like pollution, which are perceivable but hard to control. Noise and crowding, these can impact us without us being aware of them. Stressors like threats and dangers trigger our fight or flight system, the sympathetic nervous system. We see increased heart rate and respiration, increased peripheral vasoconstriction. Our endocrine response involves our adrenal glands releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol. The three distinct stages of stress are the alarm phase, where the stress kicks in and the heart races; the resistance phase, where there is fleeing or huddling, which is bathed in cortisol; and the exhaustion phase. If resistance isn't followed by recovery, our tissues become damaged and we become susceptible to illness. The physical effects of stress have damaging effects on our heart. We see increased blood pressure. Blood vessels distend, so they build up more muscle and become more rigid. This can lead to hypertension and vascular disease, which is the disease of blood vessels that get damaged with higher force of blood movement. Spots attract fat and narrow blood vessels. The worst place to experience this is in the coronary arteries, which is called coronary artery disease. In metabolism, during stress, the body secretes cortisol and glucagon, which converts glycogen to glucose. If stress is psychological, we don't need all this extra glucose, which can exacerbate metabolic conditions like diabetes. Reproduction is a huge energy expense in women, so this gets shut down during stress response. Impotence is also often caused by stress. The immune function causes inflammation. Acute stress can lead to overuse of the immune system, which can attack our own body. The behavioral effects of stress. Two areas of the brain with most glucocorticoid receptors are the hippocampus and the frontal cortex. The hippocampus is associated with learning and memory. The frontal cortex is responsible for impulse control, reasoning, etc. We do see atrophy in these areas subjected to stress. One of the major emotional responses of stress is depression, the problem being anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure, so we perceive more stressors. Or a learned helplessness. You learn from having control ripped out of your hands that you don't have control. Anger is another response. Stress is associated with increased vulnerability to heart disease. Type A is easily angered individuals and type B others. Those who had heart attacks later were mostly type A. Anxiety centers on amygdala. The amygdala has to do with our fears and phobias and fits in perfectly with our response to stress. We perceive more things as fearful. Addiction causes impairment to the frontal cortex, which is responsible for reasoning, so impaired judgment can increase likelihood of inappropriate coping mechanisms.